It started with something stupid, something so small it barely registered at first. The Wi-Fi kept cutting out, buffering in the middle of movies, dropping during conference calls, little glitches that made me curse under my breath and restart the router over and over, and Daniel, patient as always, promised he'd handle it. Promised he'd call someone to come fix it. Because he had work piling up and I had meetings and Zoom calls that couldn't keep freezing, and it was just another little domestic problem stacked on top of 1,000 others. I didn't think anything of it when Daniel said the repair guy would be coming on Saturday. Didn't think anything of it when he kissed me on the forehead before leaving for errands that morning, leaving me in my leggings and old sweatshirt, hair piled up messily, a cup of half-drunk coffee cooling on the counter. When the doorbell rang, I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered without even checking the peephole, expecting someone older, gruff maybe, some guy with a name patch sewn onto his shirt and a box of cables under his arm. But instead, there was him, standing there with a lopsided grin, sunburned forearms, tousled brown hair, younger than I expected, confident without being cocky. And for a second, I just stood there blinking at him like an idiot before stammering something about the router being in the living room. He followed me inside, carrying a battered toolkit, and the whole house suddenly felt too small, too warm, like the walls had shifted closer without warning. He worked quietly, crouched behind the TV stand, fingers moving with easy competence, tracing chords, checking signals, asking me questions I barely understood about modems and bandwidth. And I nodded along, pretending I wasn't hyper-aware of the way his shirt rode up when he reached for something. The glimpse of tan skin and lean muscle that sent a jolt straight through me. I told myself it was nothing, just a random stupid spark, a meaningless flicker of attraction, and I busied myself in the kitchen, wiping already clean counters, checking my phone compulsively, waiting for Daniel's "I'm on my way home" text that didn't come. After about an hour, he stood up, wiping his hands on a rag, and said he'd have to replace a cable outside, asked if it was okay if he used the side gate, and I followed him to the back door, heart thudding for no good reason, pretending to be casual while my skin buzzed like I was standing too close to a fire. I watched him walk across the yard, watched the easy way he moved, the way he grinned to himself when the breeze caught his hair, and something in me, something reckless and stupid and buried under years of laundry and grocery lists and calendar reminders, stirred awake. He came back inside a little while later, a smear of dirt on his forearm, the job finished, and when he thanked me for my patience, his hand brushed mine as he handed back the house key I didn't even remember giving him, and the touch lingered, electric, undeniable. I laughed too loudly, too high, said something dumb about needing to start yoga again to handle the stress of technology, and he smiled, a slow, knowing curve of his mouth that made my stomach flip. It would have been easy to walk away then, to thank him, pay him, close the door behind him and forget the whole thing, chalk it up to cabin fever or hormones or loneliness. But instead I hesitated, a fraction of a second too long, and he saw it, saw the invitation I hadn't meant to give, saw the way my fingers curled on the edge of the counter like I needed something to hold on to. He stepped closer, just a little, close enough that I could smell the soap on his skin, the faint metallic scent of tools and fresh air, and my brain screamed at me to move, to say something, to laugh it off. But my body didn't listen. He leaned in slow enough that I could have stopped it, could have turned away, but I didn't. And when his mouth brushed mine, tentative at first, testing, the dam broke. I kissed him back before I even realized I was doing it, hands fisting in his shirt, his arms circling my waist, pulling me closer. And for a moment there was nothing but heat and breath and the dizzying feeling of being wanted without expectation or history or responsibility. When we finally broke apart, breathing hard, he looked at me with something half guilty, half hungry, and I knew right then that this wasn't over, that some line had been crossed and there was no pretending it hadn't happened. I told him Daniel would be home soon, voice shaking, and he nodded, stepping back, grabbing his toolkit, heading for the door without another word. And when the door clicked shut behind him, I slumped against it, heart hammering, the taste of him still on my lips, knowing that whatever part of me had been holding the line for all these years had just snapped clean in two. I told myself it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that it was just one stupid impulsive moment that would never happen again. But the truth was, the second the door closed behind him, I was already replaying it in my mind, already craving it again, already wondering when I could see him next, how I could make it happen without it looking like I was trying. I spent the rest of that afternoon in a haze, pacing the house, scrubbing countertops that were already clean, folding and unfolding laundry I didn't need, checking my phone even though I knew I didn't have his number, knew there was no way for him to reach me unless I made the next move. Daniel came home a few hours later, arms full of groceries, smiling the way he always did when he saw me. And for a second, I thought I might throw up right there on the kitchen floor. Because looking at him, at the way his face lit up just because I was there, felt like pressing a bruise so hard it almost burst. I kissed him hello, forced myself to cook dinner, forced myself to sit through small talk about work and weekend plans, all the while feeling like my skin didn't fit right anymore. Like I was walking around inside someone else's body, someone who smiled and nodded and laughed while the world she had built tilted sideways. I lasted 3 days. 3 days of pretending nothing had changed. 3 days of trying to drown the memory of his mouth on mine under chores and meal prep and late-night shows, but it didn't work. It never really had a chance. On the 4th day, when Daniel left for work and the house fell silent around me, I found myself scrolling through the Wi-Fi repair company's number, heart hammering like I was about to commit a crime. Which, in a way, I guess I was. I called under the flimsiest excuse. The signal still felt weak in the upstairs bedroom. Could someone come check it out? Preferably the same technician who came last time, since he already knew the setup. My voice was steady, professional, but my hands shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. They sent him again. Maybe coincidence, maybe the universe conspiring with my worst impulses. But when he showed up at the door, grinning that same lopsided grin, toolbox in hand, I knew there was no turning back. He didn't waste time pretending either. The second the door closed behind him, he dropped the pretense, his bag hitting the floor with a dull thud, his hands on my waist before I could even catch my breath. And when he kissed me this time, it wasn't tentative. It wasn't testing. It was possession. Hot and hungry and reckless. And I let him. God help me. I let him pull me under like a riptide. Let him push me back against the wall. Let him strip away every excuse I had clung to for why I wouldn't do this again. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't slow. It was frantic and greedy, hands everywhere, mouths devouring, clothes half off and forgotten. The kind of desperate need that felt like ripping something essential loose from my chest. And afterward, when I stood there half-dressed and flushed and shaking, when he smiled at me like we shared some terrible, beautiful secret, I knew it wasn't going to be a one-time thing. I knew this wasn't an accident anymore. It was a pattern, a need that was only going to get harder to hide. He started coming over whenever Daniel was gone, quick visits under the excuse of follow-up repairs, new cables, signal boosters, whatever lies I could sell to justify a strange car in the driveway for an hour in the middle of the day. I got good at making excuses, better than I ever thought I could be, throwing Daniel off with talks of online courses and long phone calls with friends and errands that needed running, smiling at him like I wasn't systematically dismantling the life he trusted me to protect. Every time I promised myself it would be the last, that this time I would find the strength to end it, But the second I saw him again, the second his hands were on me, all the guilt and fear burned away, leaving nothing but the raw, ugly need to be touched, to be wanted, to be consumed. And the worst part was how easy it became, how natural it started to feel, like slipping into a second skin I wore only when Daniel wasn't looking. It scared me sometimes. How good I was at it. How easily I could kiss Daniel goodnight with another man's fingerprints still fading from my skin. How I could lie so smoothly that even I started to believe it. And somewhere deep down, in the place I didn't dare look too closely, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. Because you can't build a second life inside the first without the walls eventually cracking wide open. At first, I told myself Daniel didn't know, couldn't know, that I was careful enough, clever enough that as long as I smiled and kept the house clean and made love to him just often enough to make it believable, everything would stay hidden, safe, manageable. But lies have a way of bleeding through no matter how tightly you stitch them shut. And it didn't take long for the cracks to start showing in places I couldn't patch fast enough. It was small things at first, the way Daniel started coming home earlier than usual, the way he asked more questions about my day, the way his hands lingered a little too long when he hugged me, like he was searching for something he couldn't quite name yet. I noticed the change one afternoon when I came back from another one of my so-called yoga classes. My hair still damp from a rushed shower at the stranger's place. My skin still tingling from what we had just done. And Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop closed, his phone ignored, just watching the door like he had been waiting. He smiled when I came in, but it didn't reach his eyes, didn't soften the tension in his shoulders, and when he kissed me hello, his nose brushed my neck and he hesitated for just a second too long. Like he was breathing me in and not liking what he smelled. I laughed it off, made some excuse about running into a friend and staying for coffee, but the seed had already been planted, the doubt already flickering behind his eyes. And from that moment on, everything felt different. He asked to see the receipts for my gym membership one night, casual, joking, but his voice was tight, his fingers tapping anxiously on the table. And I fumbled through a lie so clumsy even I cringed hearing it come out of my mouth. He nodded, said he trusted me, but the air between us said otherwise, thick and heavy and buzzing with everything unspoken. After that, he started noticing everything. Not just the big things, the sudden new perfume I had forgotten to explain, the bruises I couldn't hide, the missed calls I claimed were spam. But the little ones, too. The way I flinched sometimes when he touched me unexpectedly. The way I rushed to do laundry the second I got home. The way I smiled too wide and laughed too hard at nothing at all. He never accused me directly, never shouted or demanded answers. But he didn't have to. Suspicion hung between us like a live wire, humming louder every day. The worst moment came one Saturday morning when Daniel suggested we go out for breakfast. Just the two of us, like old times. And when I hesitated, because I had already planned to meet the repairman again under the pretense of rescheduling a checkup. His face closed down completely, his shoulders stiffening as he nodded and said, "Maybe another time," his voice hollow. I saw it then. Saw how much he wanted to believe me. How hard he was trying to pretend that nothing had changed, and it made me hate myself in ways I didn't know were possible. Still, every time I thought about coming clean, about ripping the Band-Aid off and confessing everything, I froze, paralyzed by the knowledge that telling the truth wouldn't fix anything, wouldn't undo the nights spent in another man's arms, wouldn't erase the memory of the way I kissed someone else while my husband waited for me to come home and crawl into his bed, smelling like loyalty. And so I lied, again and again, building the walls higher and higher, even as I felt the foundation cracking under my feet. It wasn't just Daniel who started acting different. The repairman changed too. He wasn't sweet anymore, wasn't playful. He got rougher, bolder, pushing limits he hadn't before, texting me at all hours with crude suggestions, showing up uninvited once when Daniel was home but busy in the garage, slipping me a knowing smirk that made my skin crawl with guilt and shame. I realized then that I wasn't in control of anything, that the fantasy I thought I was managing had taken on a life of its own, wild and ugly and bigger than I could contain. Daniel never said it outright, but I could see it breaking him. See the weight he carried trying to smile through dinners, trying to hold my hand while doubt clawed at the back of his mind, trying to make love to me like he didn't feel the ghosts in our bed. I watched him shrink day by day, watched the light in his eyes dim, and still, I couldn't stop. Couldn't find the strength to tear down the lie and face whatever ruin lay on the other side. Because deep down, I was terrified. Terrified that once he knew, once he looked at me and really saw the woman I had become, he wouldn't fight for me, wouldn't scream or beg or demand explanations. He would simply walk away without a second glance. And somehow that thought was worse than anything else. Worse even than the guilt. Worse than the fear. Worse than the shame. Because I knew in the end that was exactly what I deserved. The house changed before anything else did. It stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like a stage. A place where I played the role of the good wife, while Daniel played the man trying not to notice that the woman he loved was slipping through his fingers, and everything became brittle, scripted, a performance we were both too scared to end. I noticed it first in the way he moved around me. Careful, distant, like he was afraid to touch me too hard and shatter whatever fragile piece still lingered between us. And then I noticed it in myself, in the way I jumped when the doorbell rang, in the way I flinched at every unexpected knock, in the way I kept my phone glued to my hand like a lifeline, terrified of leaving it unattended for even a second. Meals became a silent negotiation, forks clinking against plates, fake smiles stretching across tired faces, each of us pretending that if we just stayed quiet long enough, the rot eating away at us might magically disappear. Daniel would tell me about his day in the same careful voice he used with nervous clients. I would nod and laugh in all the right places, asking questions I didn't care about, weaving shallow conversations to fill the gaping void neither of us wanted to look directly at. Sometimes he would reach across the table and squeeze my hand, and I would let him, squeezing back with fingers that trembled just enough to betray me. Nights were the worst, lying side by side in the dark, our bodies inches apart but galaxies away, pretending to be asleep to avoid the weight of what we weren't saying. I could feel him watching me sometimes, feel the questions rising in his chest, so heavy they made the bed sag. But he never asked them, never demanded answers, and that somehow hurt worse than any accusation would have. It felt like he had already given up, like he was just waiting for me to admit what we both knew so he could finally let go without having to be the one to end it. Meanwhile, the visits from the repairman became more reckless, more dangerous, less careful about timing or appearances. He texted me at work, showed up once while Daniel was out jogging, made jokes about how easy it was, how blind my husband must be. And every time I gave in, every time I let him touch me, I felt myself slipping further from the woman I used to be, the woman who would have been sickened by what I had become. But part of me didn't care anymore. Part of me welcomed the numbness, the way it muted the guilt just long enough to survive another day of pretending everything was fine. And yet, no matter how deep I buried myself in denial, the signs were everywhere, bleeding through the cracks in the walls we had built. Daniel started checking the locks twice before bed, started keeping his phone face down on the nightstand like he was hiding his own secrets now, started coming home later and later without explanation. I wanted to ask where he had been, who he was seeing, but I didn't have the right anymore. Didn't have the courage to hear the answers I was suddenly terrified to know. The final crack came one night when I came home from another errand, hair damp from a rushed shower, cheeks flushed with adrenaline and shame, and found Daniel sitting in the living room with my phone in his hand. He wasn't yelling, wasn't accusing, just turning the device over and over in his palm like it was something fragile, something dangerous. And when he looked up at me, his eyes were hollow, emptied out by weeks of doubt and fear and hurt. "I had to know," he said, voice barely more than a whisper. And I didn't ask what he meant because I already knew. I crossed the room like I was sleepwalking, sat down across from him, hands shaking so hard I had to knot them together in my lap, and waited. He didn't read the messages out loud, didn't shove them in my face. He just set the phone down on the coffee table between us like it was a loaded gun and waited for me to pick it up and pull the trigger myself. I opened it with numb fingers, scrolling through texts I thought I had deleted, messages I thought were hidden, all the ugly, careless words that spelled out the truth in letters too loud to ignore. I could feel him watching me, feel the silence swelling between us, and for the first time in months, I couldn't find a single lie to save myself. The only thing left to do was break the last piece of us still standing. "I'm sorry," I said, voice shaking, eyes blurring with tears I didn't deserve to cry. And he nodded once, like he had been expecting that, like it was the only ending that made sense anymore. He didn't rage, didn't curse, didn't ask for explanations I couldn't give. He just stood up, grabbed his keys, and walked out without looking back, leaving me alone in a house that no longer felt like mine, surrounded by the wreckage of everything I had once been too sure to lose. The night Daniel left, I sat in the dark for hours, the house heavy with everything we didn't say, the silence pressing against my ribs until it hurt to breathe. And for a long time, I didn't move, didn't cry, didn't even blink, just stared at the door he closed so gently behind him, like he still loved me enough not to slam it, even now, even after everything. Part of me thought he would come back, that he just needed a night to cool off, that we could still salvage something from the wreckage, that love, real love, could survive even this. But deep down, where the lies had already rotted me hollow, I knew better. I spent the next day drafting texts I never sent, dialing his number and hanging up before it could ring, pacing the living room with his sweatshirt clutched to my chest like a talisman, like it could somehow ward off the emptiness swallowing me whole. I told myself I would confess everything if he gave me the chance. Not just the affair, but the reasons. The ugly, broken pieces of me that chased validation from a stranger instead of leaning into the arms of the man who had loved me without question. I thought if I just explained, if I just showed him how sorry I was, he might find a way to forgive me. When I finally worked up the courage to go to his office, hoping to catch him after work, to beg for 5 minutes of his time, I sat in the parking lot watching him through the glass doors, laughing with a coworker, looking lighter than I had seen him in months. And something inside me broke clean in two. He didn't look angry. He didn't look crushed. He looked free. And I realized then that sometimes love isn't enough to survive betrayal. That sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is to let them go without dragging them through the wreckage with you. Still, I tried. I wrote him letters, pouring every ugly truth onto the page, every apology I could find in me, every memory of who we used to be before I tore it all down. I left them on his doorstep, tucked under his windshield wipers, mailed them to the office where he would have no choice but to hold my shame in his hands. Weeks passed and I heard nothing. No calls, no texts, no quiet knock on the door in the middle of the night offering me one last chance to fix it. I didn't see the repairman again either. After Daniel left, I blocked his number, deleted every trace of him from my life, burned the clothes I had worn when I cheated, threw away the jewelry he gave me, Scrubbed the house until my fingers bled, trying to erase the scent of guilt that clung to every surface. But no amount of cleaning could scrub away the way Daniel looked at me before he walked out, the way he said nothing, because nothing was left to say. There were days I hated myself so much I couldn't look in the mirror. Days I wanted to scream until my throat bled. Days I wanted to turn back time and slap the stupid, reckless version of myself who thought she could dance with fire and not get burned. But mostly, there were just long stretches of numbness, of moving through the motions of a life that didn't fit anymore, of realizing that everything I thought made me happy was just smoke and mirrors. The worst part wasn't losing Daniel. The worst part was knowing I had destroyed the version of myself who could have loved him the way he deserved. That even if he had taken me back, even if he had forgiven me, I would have always been the woman who lied, who cheated, who looked into the eyes of the best man she had ever known and chose someone else. And there's no coming back from that. Not really. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is too quiet and the loneliness wraps around me like a second skin, I wonder if he ever thinks of me. If he ever misses the way we used to laugh together. If he ever remembers the way he used to pull me into his arms without needing a reason. But I know better than to hope. Hope is a luxury for people who haven't burned down everything good in their lives. I still keep the last note I wrote him, the one I never sent, tucked in the back of a drawer, crumpled and tear-stained, a confession and a goodbye all in one. It says everything I couldn't say when it mattered, everything I wish he could have heard before he stopped listening. It says, I loved you. I was too broken to love you right. And I'm sorry for every moment you thought it was your fault.